morning to all of you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak at this very important conference. So I'm going to talk about protected areas in the context of ecotourism. The title is The Heart of the Cluster Approach to Ecotourism Planning in Malaysia. This is based on my experience as the lead consultant for the National Ecotourism Plan, which has been completed and accepted by the Ministry of Tourism late last year, and it will be officially launched by the minister. They've been waiting for the minister to launch it for several months now, but it is officially accepted. And during the Hebahan workshop about 2 months ago in Putrajaya, the soft copy of this report had been distributed to those who attended. I don't have a copy, unfortunately, but if you contact Ministry of Tourism, you can get it. Soon after it is launched, it can be downloaded, I suppose. There are 3 volumes. First volume is the main recommendations, about 300 pages long. Second volume is the technical report, analysis, and so on, maybe 400 pages long, I cannot remember. And third volume contains the guidelines. So all in all, about close to 700 pages. We don't have any hard copies, unfortunately. So I'm going to talk about this essentially from my experience as a lead consultant, but in this presentation I will focus on 3 aspects. Why do we need game changers in Malaysia's ecotourism industry? And then a bit on the cluster approach. What is the dynamics of the cluster approach and why we had chosen the cluster approach in the context of ecotourism planning, and then highlight how we have applied this in the context of the National Ecotourism Plan, which is a 10-year plan from 2016 until 2025. These are, I just want to look back, and if some of you might remember that there is a National Ecotourism Plan 1997 and 96, which was developed by or written up by WWF Malaysia and then accepted by the Ministry of Tourism and used as a guideline for many years. A plan is supposed to be valid for up to 10 years, but this plan 1996 was used for more than 20 years. But time has changed, and as we know, there are contemporary challenges, especially in ecotourism, and we all know that we have tired products, especially in our national parks. We lack innovation, storytelling, interpretation, and then our neighbors are developing wonderful products in the greater Mekong sub-region, Vietnam, Cambodia, and even Laos. So we are losing a bit of our competitive edge. And then we also have this problem of there are many more tourists, especially domestic tourists, going to our protected areas, especially national parks, and putting a lot of pressure for park managers to be able to manage these parks, especially because park managers are not trained in visitor management. They are mainly from the sciences. So, and then when our tourists go into national parks, the social construct, why do they go there? The image is not the usual Western image of peace, tranquility, wilderness. It is about having a good time, which is nothing wrong with that. And then with friends and family, and sometimes a lot of noise is created and so on. And because this is a long-term plan, we have to be cognizant of the threats from climate change. So how do we make ecotourism also resilient in the face of climate change? So these are the contemporary challenges. And the summary of the findings that we derived from the study was that we need to expand the market. Many years ago, if you say ecotourism or ecotourists, we always look at the purist point of view, people who are going for nature, peace, tranquility, and so on. But now there are many other forms of ecotourists. Mainstream tourists can also be attracted to ecotourism, especially those that is close to urban areas that offer soft ecotourism, trekking, bird watching, as long as we educate them and manage them well, there's nothing wrong in getting even mainstream tourists into national parks. We have eco-adventure, young people now going happy to do active activities in protected areas and surrounding them. And then it is very competitive out there. While we were doing this, an Australian consultant contacted me asking if there are any Malaysian companies willing to invest in ecotourism in Australia. And I replied saying that we are looking for the same from Australia and quality ones. So it's still a small pool of quality investors, if you like the word quality, if you don't like it. And we need to unlock the potential of ecotourism, economic potentials, because the money that we get from ecotourism has to be plowed back into conservation. So, and of course, we need to harness again the synergy between conservation and ecotourism. And in ecotourism, unfortunately, there is no opportunity for enhancing the economies of scale, because we have small scale. We cannot bring in 400-room resort, so we have to look at how do we enhance the economies of scope, which I will describe, which is the basis for the cluster approach. So quickly, just to say that where does ecotourism take place, most of them in Malaysia are happening in our national parks, IUCN Category 2. Yesterday we had a very good presentation by Dr. Siva on harmonizing this, which is, but as it is now, this is where it is happening. And of course, outside of national parks, they are happening in rural and remote areas. Because of that, there's a difficulty in cutting down costs for investment and so on. But increasingly, we are getting some forms of urban ecotourism. It used to be an oxymoron. Mana boleh ada ecotourism when it's near to urban areas, but now it is accepted, and a form of ecotourism that is very appealing to mainstream tourists. You have the Kuala Ganda, for example, Frim. They are ecotourism that are very close to urban areas, so they are considered as urban ecotourism. There is a demand for market segment that appeal to this kind of experience. So the cluster approach has been used in tourism. You don't have to worry about this. This is just the first attempt in Michael Porter used it many years ago for regional competitiveness. I tried it in the context of IRDA, almost a disaster, disaster, so don't worry about this. But I was attracted to this micro cluster approach. So while we are doing this, we were looking for a tourism planning rationale to do the National Ecotourism Plan. And the first one identified 48 potential sites, which was the groundbreaking recommendation at that time. But over the years, we cannot still be asking the question, what's happening to all or each and every one of the 48 sites? We have to move on, and we have used the cluster approach simply because it offers a very strong rationale for planning in the context of ecotourism that happens in rural areas. So, and then this is some of the issues when you talk about ecotourism. The very high cost of providing infrastructure if one were to develop an eco-lodge in the middle of a jungle, the lack of economies of scale, so you cannot bring in many number of rooms that can bring down the cost of construction and so on. Of course, we all know that there is a lack of local capacity, lack of formal education. You need to spend a lot of money on training, and you get fragmented, uncontrolled, or unsustainable tourism development. So these are some of the issues that we thought that the cluster approach can help alleviate, simply because the cluster approach, you look at the definition here, is a critical mass of competitive or even complementary tourism products that include one or more major attractions concentrated in one geographical area. This is the definition. So in practice, the cluster approach has been used in Spain, in India, and in Tasmania, when Tasmania developed the thematic tourism routes based on whether the cluster is, they call it potential, embryonic, emerging, and many more. So we saw that it is useful. It is a very solid theoretical underpinning behind the cluster approach. And this is how the cluster approach looks in theory. So first of all, there is a co-location. When one resort, eco-lodge, goes to a particular rural area, it will be followed most of the time by several more, offering the same tourist experience, accommodation, some activities, birding, and so on, and then a form of clustering will occur. So once clustering occurs, there might be some attempts in increasing the economies of scope and scale and scope. Scope is just simply reducing costs. How do you reduce costs? By working together, complementary networks and so on. Then you have a pool market, you have a common strategies, common tactics, and common marketing strategies too. So this is in theory, but there are three forms of clustering. So horizontal, vertical, and diagonal. The one that you can see most of the time is horizontal clustering. So I take the example of the Gopeng, if you have been to Gopeng, eco-adventure cluster, when the Kampar River was first discovered as a good place for whitewater rafting. One resort went there, eco-lodge, and then now there are about 10. Each and every one offering the same thing. They are competitors, but they need to work also among themselves. But there is some kind of reduction in costs. You don't have to build an extra access road you can share, but it goes through the kampong, so they cause a lot of friction too. So this is horizontal clustering, and then vertical clustering. Don't bother too much about this. It is mainly related to, let's say, Cameron Highlands, where there are fresh flowers industry or even wine tourism. But this is very crucial, which is diagonal clustering. So once you have horizontal clustering, it hasn't fully optimized the potential for the area as an ecotourism destination. So you need specialization. You cannot have everyone offering the same product. So then there should be specialization in the form of someone offering accommodation, another one transportation, eateries, eco-adventure activities, souvenirs, and others. This is normal, and this is all part of the tourist experience. If you can provide this at a reduced cost, and then this is how the dynamics of clustering can really be effective. Look at the one of the clusters that we identified, which is the Kundasang cluster at the base of Mount Kinabalu. It's a wonderful cluster. Yes, everything here, food and even vegetables to bring back, flowers. But for those coming down from Mount Kinabalu, there is no place to have a foot massage. So there is something wrong in terms of the gap in the cluster. That is it because the locals are not skilled? They don't have the skills to do this? Or is it they don't have the capital to open up food massage reflexology? So this is where we can provide interventions to fill up some of the gaps in the cluster optimization. This is the best example that we look at, which is in Phuket. Don't be surprised. Phuket is not only famous for sea, sun, and the 3 or 4 S, but they have a small kampong called Muang Village. So the first time the MIMA, mixed martial arts, called Tiger Mixed Martial Arts, went there from the US. They offer mixed martial arts, but not only that, they offer weight reduction, yoga, jiu-jitsu, and so on. And the place became very famous. And it has about 300 tourists every day. And some stay on for a year to reduce weight. And this was followed by several more local MIMA centers, which are run by locals. So they are offering the same products in terms of mixed martial arts and the exercise that you relate to for physical health. And this is called horizontal clustering. Subsequently, diagonal clustering occurred. So many of the villagers saw the potential of providing, of course, massage in Thailand, healthy food, supplements, and no salt, no sugar diet, restaurants, so on, laundry, souvenir shops, even a private medical service, ambulances in the event of accident involving some of the fighters. So the whole place was transformed into a dynamic cluster through diagonal clustering. And this former rubber plantation or small holdings now is a thriving eco-tourism, rural tourism destination in Thailand. So this is what we have seen that we can replicate, and then it will have synergy between conservation and also ecotourism. And we have seen several. I'm going to pick up one, for example, in Terapuri, in Terengganu, Setiu wetlands, where you need, when we are trying to understand the dynamics of clustering, we have identified the crucial role of accelerators. This is in the form of outsiders. Normally locals lack the capacity, so you need to bring in someone from outside. It could be a social enterprise. This is the best situation. And he or she can then spread the economic benefits, so establish strong links with the partnership with the community-based ecotourism and promote responsible tourism. So in Terapuri, Alex Lee, the operator, has then developed this, and he doesn't provide services like boats for wildlife watching. So he allows the local people to run the firefly service, the visit to the homestay, home visit rather than homestay, all the cottage industry, and then in the evenings the local people perform, or they take them tourists to their homes to perform menorah and wayang kulit, and the skilled carpenters then were used to build again these 200-year-old buildings that he put together to offer this very unique Langkah Suka court. So there are several more, and this is how the clustering is occurring now. So in the Setiu wetlands, you have that very good cultural heritage that could become an IUCN Category 5 connected landscape. So this is what we identified, and we saw that in the context of clustering, you also need networks. So without a network, the cluster will not be able to sustain itself. So this is where we identified that in every cluster that we look at in the whole country, there are either formal or informal networks. For example, in Sarawak, you have the Mulu Special Parks Committee, which is supposed to be the network to bring together public and public sector and local communities. Whether it works or not, you have to look at yourself. And in Taiping, for example, Kuala Sepetang, they have MPT, Majlis Perhimpunan Taiping, being the driver, the network again, and then it brings together the local communities for the Clip and many more local organizations. And you have the Kinabatangan, Kita, again, also in Setiu wetlands, where they have Kunita, Pewanis, Kopel, Pila, and so on. So we identified that we need this kind of network because the network has to do these functions: product development, self-help, joint promotion, and also, most importantly, conflict resolution, because in many of the clusters, you have different stakeholders. There are many communities, but they are never homogeneous. So Gopeng, for example, is always a constant battle between communities. If you cannot resolve conflicts, then the cluster will not be able to achieve success. So these are what we have identified as the dynamics of clustering. So I'm still doing research and trying to measure how this dynamics is happening, the systemic relationship between the role of accelerators, access to capital and microcredit, the establishment of tourism cooperatives to become the network, and then how do you expand the market size and economic pie. These are just a summary of how the dynamics is. This is very, of course, complicated or complex. So if you understand the dynamics, it's easy then for us to come up with interventions. It could be in the form of to create a pro-business environment for investors, scaling up the SMEs to better access to microcredit, capacity building, and also destination management that includes visitor management, the use of limits of acceptable change as a tool to manage visitors, and of course, integrated marketing. This is, for example, one of the Adi Negara in Kota Baru. This is the workshop that he is suffering in, despite there are so many international tourists going to visit him. Now his foot will be amputated soon because of diabetes, but this is how we can identify gaps and provide interventions, but it depends who wants to do it. So to quickly move on, so we have used that clustering approach as a tool. And in the National Ecotourism Plan, we have identified 60 clusters. We did not identify it. We sat down with all the stakeholders. Unfortunately, we were not engaged from the beginning. It was a private consultant that were engaged. They spent a year doing it. The report wasn't accepted. I was called in to so-called salvage the plan, and we had only 6 months. Despite that, we managed to get a lot of engagement sessions with all the stakeholders. We had to finish the work by December last year. So we went through all the states and stakeholders, and all the states then came out with all the clusters that they felt could be the scope for their work in the next 10 years. So this is how they are distributed. If you want to look at them, you look at the plan. They contain all with the detailed information on each cluster. And then we could only do 6 examples of the clusters in the report. You can't do that because the report is supposed to be strategic. It's not a micro plan. So we then, in the 6 examples, which are 2 in Sabah, 2 in Sarawak, 2 in Peninsula. So we put it under keystone attraction, supporting products, tourist flows, market, tourist gaps, and then there is action plans. And the action plans are divided into product development, human resource, marketing, destination management, and infrastructure. For the rest, we only provide a toolkit. 54 clusters we identified. A toolkit is for each of the state government to take back and form a network or a task force in each state, and they have to work through, according to our template, how do we go about and discuss and come to a decision on the micro aspect of the plan. So we cannot provide magic in the plan because this is what the state has to do, but we provide the approach for the decision making that is consultative and participatory. So this is an example of the Tasik Kenyir Ajil Ecotourism cluster, and each cluster there is a keystone. A keystone could be a national park, protected area, it could be a fauna, flora that people from New York will spend 3 days to come and visit. So that's a keystone, orangutan, for example. If you have no keystone, then you won't have that iconic value that people will pay a lot of money to come for. So we identified the keystone, we identified the main activities supporting the tourist flows, where tourists come from, who they are, market segments, and then Merang Penarik, similar, Setu Wetlands is the keystone, and then the Taiping Kuala Sepetang, and the keystone could be Matang Mangroves, and so on. So these, all 60 have got very detailed information based on our engagement with all, but they are not cast in stone. This is a living document. You can add in what have been left out because this is the purpose of the plan. So the final report is presented according to 5 pillars: investments in ecotourism, tourism concessions, synergy between ecotourism and conservation, ecotourism marketing, ecotourism clusters. There are 18 strategies and 84 actions. So in investments, we look at the whole pro-business environment, and we are losing Malaysia to our neighbors because we have not been able to come up with incentives that can attract quality investments. We have MIDA offering tax breaks, but our neighbors like Laos and Indonesia, they have maps showing the unique locations where you can invest, and then the human resource there, and so on. So we have come up with strategies to address this, and now there are task force set up between MIDA and MOTEC to look at all these gaps and improve them. And how do you enhance? There are many small-scale operators that they are stagnant because they don't have access to capital or microcredit. They have special tourism fund, but they don't know how to write the proposal. Then they are, near Gua Musang for all those caving. There are some operators. They don't have the equipment to offer to high-quality tourists and so on. So we identified how do you enhance the facilitation system within the existing and future programs, and then we look at how we can enhance tourism concessions. Sabah is doing this with great success. All over Southeast Asia, concession is anybody can understand. But we still have some problems until now to convince the other. I have to be frank, Ministry of Natural Resources have not been, still cannot accept the protocol. It's not a policy, it's a protocol on tourism concessions that will open up this opportunity for sustainable financing of protected areas, enhance public and public partnerships, so that income from ecotourism can be plowed back into conservation. So despite the success of Sabah Parks especially, this has not catch on. Probably it needs more discussion to get the protocol accepted by both the two key ministries, Ministry of Tourism and NRE. And synergy, we have got 6 strategies, actions, managing tourist behavior, and again, all these things I'm not going to go through. Marketing, we cannot go for generic marketing. It has to be targeted according to the market segments, using all the modern tools. The cluster. So we come out the cluster, 1 as a tool, 2 to develop the clusters, number 3. Then the industry players can use it to design self-drive, holiday packages, and so on, and to create the so-called destination management organization, DMOs, at clusters they have already achieved this maturity. So this is quickly, last few slides. This is how we develop. For example, the Kuala Kangsar Lenggong Royal Belum cluster. This ends in Royal Belum because most self-drive or drive holiday makers from international markets will drive up to Royal Belum. They seldom stop at Kuala Kangsar because their GPS doesn't say that Kuala Kangsar is a wonderful royal town. They always bypass Lenggong, the Perak Man World Heritage. So we have populate all these resources into this, and then we work with the tour operators and say that can you sell this and so on, and we develop all the keystone Royal Belum, supporting products and tourist flows and so on. And then we look at all the plans. What do they have in the rancangan struktur, rancangan tempatan? We do not want to be in conflicts, so we endorse what has been planned at the local authority, state and regional level. So all the plans and the visions are incorporated into the clusters. And then we have this stakeholders engagement so that we will go through what are the product development issues, destination management, including carrying capacity, threshold limits, and so on, marketing and human resource. And then from here, we develop the issues and the opportunities. And this will become the basis for the recommendations. And the whole report shows the detailed recommendations for all 6 clusters. So I don't have time to show them, just to give you, a snapshot view of how the cluster has been used in this plan. So feel free to get a copy of the plan, or it will be made available very soon, I think, to be downloaded. So what we have done really is to use the cluster to facilitate a new way of developing tourism master plans. So we are no longer the experts, we facilitate a consultative and participatory process, and the spatial planning then will be decided by the process rather than the consultants decided. Unfortunately, no, there is no size that fits all. The cluster will fail if you don't have a network, and the clusters cannot produce magic results. It will take many months or years even to take place. So now what's happening, Pemandu is spearheading the 3 pilot projects in the country and with MOTEC. One is the Taiping Kuala Sepetang Matang cluster. The other one is the Sandakan Kinabatangan cluster in Sabah. The third one is the Kuching Bako, including Buntal, as the cluster that will bring in all the stakeholders. And then the subsequent clusters will be further developed into action plans that could be implemented in a very short time. So once, if we can show success in all 3 clusters, and then it could be replicated elsewhere in the 60 clusters identified in the plan. So thank you very much for your attention.